Hello everybody and welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty and in today's episode I have another Mystery Box Monday video for you. So what is Mystery Box Monday? I have this box of grab bag of supplies from Simon Says Stamps and I pull out 3 items and then I set about making a craft project featuring those items. Now because of the nature of this box, a lot of these things are discontinued in one way or another, and if I can find them I will post them in the show notes for you. So let's take a look at each of the 3 items. We have a layering floral stamp set from Pink Fresh, and we have another flower stamp set from Simon Says, and then we have these wonderful word dies. I am impressed with this being in this box. And that's a Pink Fresh word die, both the shadow and the word. So that is great, and it's kind of holiday related, birthday, holidays, and so on. So let's see what I can do with these 3 items to create a craft project. So I've decided I'm going to make some cards today, and all these flowers and then particularly the word die set led me to deciding to go ahead and do Mother's Day cards now since that's coming up soon. And my daughter has told me that I am not doing enough holiday videos, so let's go ahead and do that. Now I have these floral stamp sets and I'm sure to prep my stamp sets by rubbing them off. I usually just use my fingers until they remove the shininess, and that's just oils from the manufacturing process that can interfere with quality stamping. And then I'm going to heat emboss, a tone-on-tone heat emboss on this cardstock. Now at first I thought I would do more of a watermark where you use the Versamark ink and just let it dry, and that adds a subtle kind of a shadowy background to these projects, but it wasn't coming out quite clearly enough, so I decided to go ahead and heat emboss. And I'm using fine detailed embossing powder from Hero Arts, and this is a new to me embossing powder since my previous embossing powder hasn't been working very well, and I was told that they don't go bad, but for some reason it's not working, so I need to kind of look more into that. So if you're new to embossing, it's helpful to have things to clean up afterwards. I use a sheet to catch overspill of the powder, and usually there's still bits that go around. And when I'm done heating up and melting that embossing powder, you can see the shine and texture that it has on the card. And I wipe things down with a dry cloth to kind of remove any stray powder that's kind of floating around on my desk because it can interfere with future stamping steps. Speaking of future stamping steps, let's go ahead and play with these layering flower stamps. I am going to create a floral wreath for the inside of my project, and it's going to be a little bit of a surprise, so stick around and I'll show you what I mean by that. Now, I am fairly new to these layering stamps. I've done 2-step stamping in the past and plenty of other stamping, but a lot of these companies are coming out with these stamps that you layer on top of each other to add increasing levels of detail to the same image. And I don't have a lot of experience, like I said, and I thought I would be just fine giving this a go because I do have enough stamping experience in general, and I was honestly having quite a bit of difficulty getting things to line up in a way that was satisfactory, especially the little stems on the leaves. It had 2 different stamps to that. It had the leafy stamp, which looked pretty all by itself, but then the stems kind of tied everything together because there are some of these little flowers on this next flower stamp that kind of float out there, and they looked odd without having the stems in there. And while I thought I would be able to just leave off the stems of the stamp, it just wasn't working very well. Now I did look at the back packaging. It has a layering guide to it, and I did try to use that to help me, but in the end I really should have pulled out my stamp positioner, and that would have made me happier. I was just trying to give it a go, assuming that not everyone has stamp positioners out there, and you know, it just wasn't working for me very well. Okay, so I finished off my wreath with the florals, the greenery, and each of the florals and the greenery had 2 levels of stamps layering to them, and then there was a 3rd stamp that kind of makes the complete circle that just had the 1 layer to it, and their sample had it in a different black color, and I like the idea of that. Now here I'm showing you fussy cutting the inside of a wreath. You just poke a hole with your scissors, and if you do some slits from that center hole around kind of the radius of this, and then roughly clip that out, it gives you a lot more room in order to fussy cut kind of a tight inside. Moving on, here is the surprise I mentioned inside of this card. I am doing a very simple pop-up card. If you've never seen this before, I am going to walk you through it just in case, because it's always hard to tell what people know and don't know when they're watching my videos. So I just cut a slit in the center of my card, and I kind of sized it to make sure it wouldn't be too much bigger than the edge of my wreath, so it wouldn't show a lot through that center hole of the wreath. Now, one thing to know, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that the longer you make your slits, the kind of more forward it brings the pop-up on the inside of the card, and the shorter you make it, the farther back of a pop-out and the less deep of a pop-out it will be. And I will show you more detail of that a little bit later. And because you see that slit on the outside, that card front that we created with the embossing on it, I layered directly over this card that I did with a pop-up. So this is actually 2 layers of cardstock, and because of that, I do give it a nice press with my bone folder and trim off any excess edges, because no matter how well you cut your cardstock, it's unlikely to be 100%. So that is my card base finished and created. Now I'm going to create my die cut words for the front of the card, and this is a technique that I like to do sometimes when I don't have cardstock that exactly matches my ink. I will make my own cardstock just by swiping the ink pad across a plain white sheet of paper, and sometimes it can take swiping back and forth to get a good color. But in the end, you'll have a cardstock that matches your project. And because I am actually making 2 cards in this video to make my time go farther, I was sure to ink up enough cardstock to make all of my word pieces. And so I am layering these words up that say Mother's Day. And I tell you, I got to putting these words on my card front and I realized I forgot to cut the word happy. So my card ended up just saying Mother's Day. So I went back, and here we go. I went back and die cut my word happy. Now here's a little trick that I like to use with finer die cuts, is I'll use a scrap of something and put a little puddle of glue on it and just kind of run my finer die cuts through that puddle. And it's easier. Earlier you saw me doing little dots of glue with a fine tip glue. But if you don't have a fine tip glue or it's feeling too messy, this puddle dab technique kind of helps control the ooze a little bit on that glue. And now I have my word happy in there. And I wish I had centered this. I had some other ideas for this card, but they didn't quite come out the way I would have wanted. So I would have centered the word happy in the end of this. But part of the reason I didn't is that I am adding a little bit of pop detail to these embossed flowers. Now, wherever that embossing is, the ink won't stick. So if you rub a little bit of ink over those embossed flowers, it gives them a little more detail and dimension than, and here you can see the 2 side by side. So that just subtle detail gives a little more energy to the front of this card. It is on the simple side visually, and I kind of wanted it to be that way so that when you open up the card, it's a little more of a surprise with that pop-up inside. So while it's simpler than I would have probably otherwise done, I think it works in terms of the overall card design. And inside I added one more little sentiment from these stamp sets, because if you've got these mystery products, use all of the bits and pieces that you can possibly use. And so here are 2 side-by-side looks at these cards. Now one of the wreaths I fussy cut the inside out, and the other wreath I left solid, and I actually kind of like that one better. I thought I would prefer the cutout one. But it's all up to you and what you like to do and how much time you want to spend, because a lot of people just don't like fussy cutting. But I think those wreaths are a sweet surprise when you open up the card. So I thought that made a great project to use with these, 2 flower stamp sets. What do you do with 2 flower stamp sets? Here is a look at another project I made. Now those dies are perfect for slimline cards, and I loved how well it fit across. And for this one, because it is a long slimline card, I did make more pop-ups for the inside, and there is a closer look for you at the detail of the different levels of pop-ups that you can get. I made shorter slits for the outside edges and longer slits for the middle, and then I can layer those pop-ups together. So that is it for today. I will leave you with a few still photos of these projects as we go. I hope you enjoyed this project. I love doing these mystery box videos because it's just fun to reach into a box of supplies and see what you can come up with from kind of out of nowhere. I will be back later this week with 2 scrapbooking process videos, so if card making is not your jam, I will be back with that. I hope you join me then.